With all of these storms going on, many of you are going to see sights like this.
What if it starts blowing this way? Let it down.
Now the big question is, who is responsible for the damage and the cost when this trampoline lands on your car or your fence or your house and smashes your roof in, or brings your fence down, or dents your car roof or your bonnet, or smashes the windows and causes untold amounts of damage? Well, the answer, as you might expect, is a little bit complicated. Now, most insurance policies will have an exemption for trampolines. In other words, they just won't cover them regardless, because they consider them as a high-risk thing that if it goes wrong and flies away and causes damage, well, that's your fault because you had a trampoline. So what about the legal position as to who is responsible? Well, this would come down to whether someone is negligent. In other words, they've recognized that there is a risk involved and they have a general duty of care to those around them to not cause them any damage. And yet they haven't taken any precautions and they haven't taken any steps to prevent said damage from happening. So let's say you have a huge trampoline which is going to have a large surface area, perfect for wind to pick up, catch and throw across the street. If you haven't tied it down, then it's quite obvious that this might lift up and fly across the street during a big storm. Let's say you've attached one little rope and you've tied it to something else, but that something else is not very heavy. Then that's likely to get pulled up as well and also get thrown across the street. In fact, just here, we have a significant problem with the wind during any storm. One day I came back to find a whole of my tabletop lifted off the frame and I found it in the trees. There's not much I could really have done about that. But another day I came back and found the barbecue gas canister attached on the other side of the garden. The wind had picked the whole thing up, it was on its side and it had thrown it to the other side of the garden, pulling the gas canister attached, which is the full-size one, and they're quite heavy. So who is really responsible if this happens to you and your trampoline has gone flying down the street and smashed somebody's car in? Well, as I said, if you're found to be negligent in not taking any precautionary steps to prevent this from taking off and flying off in the first place, then you're most likely to be held responsible. However, if you've taken lots of precautions, let's say you've tied it down with 3 or 4 battens, and you've used sandbags and you've weighted it down and you've taken every possible step that you possibly could, then it's much less likely that you're going to be held liable. Then it will be deemed just a freak incident of nature and it's taken off and it's not your fault. Because in law, you are going to be held accountable for your actions or inactions. Malfeasance and nonfeasance. Malfeasance means you've done something but you've done it badly. Nonfeasance meaning you've not done it at all. So in the case where you just haven't done anything to prevent this trampoline flying off in the first place, then you are almost certainly going to be held liable for the costs and the damage if the case goes to court. However, if the insurance companies don't want to get involved, and that's on both sides, so your house insurance policy just says no, we don't want to deal with it, but the other person who owns the car that's been smashed in, their house insurance policy says we don't want to deal with this either, then it is down to a dispute between the two parties, and the likelihood is the only way a payout is going to work is if the matter goes to court, unless of course the person accepts responsibility, agrees to pay out and pays towards the damage. But then what happens with the actual repair and how it's paid for, and is it done at a prestige dealer or is it done in a backstreet chop shop? Well, this is going to come down to being reasonable, and the person who's had the damage is going to be expected to mitigate the further loss and damage to their vehicle. For example, let's say if it smashed the roof in and it's now open to the elements and could get flooded and make the situation a whole lot worse. They will be expected to cover it up or repair it as soon as possible to prevent further damage and to prevent further costs that they could then ultimately have to claim against the other party. If they failed to mitigate their losses, they might lose the opportunity to claim any of those further losses against the person whose trampoline it is. But as for the repair itself, the person whose property it is that's been damaged does have a degree of choice as to where this thing is repaired. If it's a 20-year-old vehicle, then it's much less likely to be reasonable to take it to a main dealer as it would be to another aftermarket repair shop. However, if it was a brand new vehicle straight out of the factory and only delivered a few days before on the other end of the spectrum, then it's much more reasonable in that scenario that it's supposed to go to a main dealer for them to repair it. But this all comes down to the reasonableness for the costs of repairing the vehicle, i.e. there should ideally be several quotes for the repair, and one roughly in the middle of those quotes should be taken as a reasonable cost for repairing it. But it's very likely that a court would take the view that that authentic parts should be used as opposed to aftermarket parts. Again, as I say, particularly in the case where it's a brand new vehicle that's just been delivered as against a 20-year-old one where perhaps parts are not even available anymore. So please do let this be a lesson to all of you with the upcoming storms. Tie those trampolines down, tie your barbecues down, and make sure that your tabletops aren't flying off in the wind. You cannot believe my surprise when I came back to find a huge tabletop in the trees. I'm not kidding. This tabletop was in the trees and it was all scratched because it was obviously within the branches of the trees. So you won't believe some of the things that will fly away, so make sure you tie them down. In the meantime, please like the video, remember to subscribe, and thanks for watching.